Week 14 of the fantasy football season, and his running back sits this week. First starts Breece Hall of the New York Jets. So Breece Hall, I know the last few weeks numbers really haven't been there. We know the Shed offensive line all banged up, one of the worst in the league, and it's been a quarterback carousel pretty much of guys who can't move the football and make plays. It went from Zach Wilson, it went to Tim Boyle, and then we saw Trevor Siemian in the end of that game for the Jets. So this week here in a matchup versus the Houston Texans, that's a middle-of-the-pack defense versus the run this season. Breece Hall, we know he's a playmaker. We know he's got top 10 running back potential. And even this week, if he's a number 2 running back for fantasy owners, I think he could go out there and make some plays and put up numbers. The next start, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. Javonte Williams, the last couple weeks, it's been tougher matchups for him where he's pretty much topping out at 10, 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But this week, a great matchup at the Los Angeles Chargers. We saw Ezekiel Elliott just come off a ball game with 14 fantasy points. I think Javonte Williams in between the tackles can make plays. This Charger defense really hasn't been good this season versus the run. And this Charger team in general, their defense the last few weeks have been on the field more because this offense has been coming off the field a lot. So Javonte Williams this week, I think, bounces back and has a solid ball game. Next start, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. So this kid, what a running back he is already for this Dolphin team, and he fits the system and the scheme of Mike McDaniel like a glove. A lot of speed is Achane, a kid with a nose for the end zone. We saw him return in last week's game, and he put on a performance at the Commanders. 73 rush yards in that one and 2 touchdowns as well. And this week here in a matchup versus Tennessee, where I know they've been pretty solid this season versus the run. It just doesn't matter. This offense is high-powered, and they find ways to get their playmakers the ball. Tyreek Hill and Achane, when you know the ball's going to them, and still can't stop him. So Achane, I just needed to see that he was healthy and could handle a decent workload. Even though I know with some garbage time in that game he still went out there and put in a good performance. He's a start. Next start, Zach Moss of the Indianapolis Colts. So Jonathan Taylor, he's out minimum one more week. Right now is Taylor. So Zach Moss is going to start once again for this Indianapolis Colts team. I know it was a tough game and a tough matchup versus Tennessee, one of the better teams in the league versus the run. But this week here, a good matchup at the Cincinnati Bengals. So Zach Moss, he's a dual threat out of the backfield. We know he could handle that big workload, 25, 30 carries. We saw it early in the season. And in that game, it was just a pass-happy ball game for Indianapolis, and it worked out for them to pull out the victory. So this week at Cincinnati, I think Zach Moss and this run game gets back on track. The next start, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Thursday Night Football, this possibly could be one of the worst Thursday night games we've seen in a while with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New England Patriots. So the Steelers coming off a tough loss to the Arizona Cardinals. Mitchell Trubisky is going to be in there quarterback. And to be honest, I think Mitchell Trubisky is a better quarterback than Kenny Pickett in terms of getting the football down the field and at least making plays. I know Trubisky, the accuracy hasn't been great in his career, and he has been a turnover machine. But I think Jaylen Warren and this offense could improve a little bit with Trubisky at quarterback, and we'll see if it will. So this week here in a matchup versus New England, where their defense has been middle of the pack, but also they've given up some yards over the last few weeks. I would give Warren a start. The next start, Austin Ekeler of Los Angeles Chargers. So believe it or not, Austin Ekeler, the last 3 weeks, he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. So this week, a great matchup on paper versus the Broncos. Give up the most fantasy points to running backs on the season. And we know Austin Ekeler throughout his career has had a great track record versus Bronco teams. So last week, it was a wet field out there, slippery football versus New England, and they just wanted to get the win, even though it was very ugly. Winning 6-0 was his Charger team, and get out of there. So week of matchup versus division rival Denver. They're back at home, which is always a good thing, obviously, for this team. And I think this week he could go out there at Austin Ekeler and bounce back in a big way. So he's a start, and he's a guy you're going to start each and every week. But like I said, the last 3 weeks, it's been the worst stretch of his career. But now I think he gets back on track in a game that's must-win versus division rival. And the final starts Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. So this Panther team, there's been no bright spots for the most part, obviously, this year. 1-11 on the year. But Adam Thielen early in the season looked good. And Chuba Hubbard the last 2 weeks has had 20 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. So last week going over 100 yards rushing and finding the end zone. I know this week it's a tougher matchup versus stout run defense for the most part of the New Orleans Saints. But we saw Jahmyr Gibbs yards per carry last week. He had a good game, and David Montgomery found the end zone. So I think Chuba Hubbard, they're going to give him those 20, 25 touches in total possibly. And Miles Sanders, for the most part, he's been a non-factor the last 4 or 5 weeks. And now with the new coaching staff running the helm after Frank Reich got fired a couple weeks ago, and we saw the first game without him. Chuba Hubbard's definitely the number one back over there. And to start this week down to the sits, Alexander Mattison of the Minnesota Vikings. So I think Ty Chandler is the more talented back, better receiving back out of the backfield. And for the most part, these running backs, they're splitting or 60-40 going in Madison's favor. So this week at the Vegas Raiders, I know it's not that bad of a matchup, but Alexander Madison's been a tough running back to trust all season. And in a big week 14 where a lot of teams are trying to fight to get in their playoffs or stay in as well, or even fight for a bye, I think it's tough to put Madison in your lineup in a big game this week. The next hit, Devin Singletary of the Houston Texans. I think Damian Pierce, he's back in the good gracious of the coaching staff. He had a few goal line touches. He found the end zone as well. And Devin Singletary really didn't touch the ball a lot in this game. Now week 14 and a tougher matchup at the New York Jets, where their defense has been one of the better units in the league, even though their offense has been one of the worst. The defense has gone out there pretty much weekly, and they've kept their team in the game. So this week, going to New York, long flight, obviously, from Houston to New York could be a problem as well for Houston to see how they play on the East Coast. And Devin Singletary, after we saw last game with Damian Pierce getting opportunities and his touches going down, he's an easy sit next to Khalil Herbert of the Chicago Bears. So I think Roschon Johnson's going to get more looks. And Delonta Foreman, I'm not going to count him out of the backfield as well for the Chicago Bear team, even though we know he left a couple weeks ago with the ankle injury. But coming off a bye, we're going to see who's going to get the touches at the running back position. It's a tougher matchup versus the Detroit Lions, where they are stout defense versus the run game for the most part. And right now, Khalil Herbert in a big week as well. He's a tough running back that's been injured on and off this season to trust. He's a sit next to Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. As Zach Charbonnet, he got banged up at the end of that game versus the Dallas Cowboys. And I think Kenneth Walker is going to return in this one, obviously, for the Seattle Seahawks team. But it's a tough matchup with the San Francisco 49ers. They just shut down the run game of the Philadelphia Eagles. DeAndre Swift only having 4 fantasy points in that one. And the Niners, they sent a message in that game in Week 13 that they're the team in the NFC. And this week, I expect the same once again versus division rival, the Seattle Seahawks, who are still in the wild card hunt. But right now, you know, the San Francisco 49er team wants to knock a division rival out. And Kenneth Walker, even if he returns, I don't think he's 100%. And he's a running back this season where we've seen some great games and some games where he's been pedestrian. So this week, where him most likely not being 100% and a tough matchup at the 49ers, he's a sit for me next to Kareem Hunt of the Cleveland Browns. So Kareem Hunt, he's pretty much been non-existent over the last few weeks for fantasy owners. It's been the Jerome Ford backfield over there where he's making plays and putting up fantasy points. And even Pierre Strong had a few strong runs, no pun intended, in last week's game at the Los Angeles Rams. So Kareem Hunt, at this point of his career, his best days are behind him, and he's just pretty much a backup running back in my opinion. And he's a sit for me versus the Jaguars, where their run defense has been stout for the most part this season. Next hit's A.J. Dillon of the Green Bay Packers. I think Aaron Jones is finally going to return in this game with the New York Giants. I know the Giants' run defense hasn't been good at all this season, but A.J. Dillon's been a tough running back to trust because some weeks he'll get some numbers and some weeks he won't do much. For the most part, his ceiling as well is only 10-12 fantasy points for A.J. Dillon. So even in a plus matchup at the New York Giants, but with possibly Aaron Jones returning, he's a sit for me. And the final sit's Gus Edwards of the Baltimore Ravens. So Gus Edwards, he's having some season, no doubt about it, with the knack of the end zone and the short yardage back for this Baltimore Raven team. But after coming off the bye week, I think Keaton Mitchell is going to be more involved in the offense. Gus Edwards has been touchdown dependent. If he's not getting the touchdown, he's only working on 10 to 12 touches per game, and that's obviously not going to last. So right now, this week, in a tougher matchup versus the Los Angeles Rams, where they're pretty stout versus the run, Gus Edwards, if he don't find the end zone, he's not going to do much in my opinion. And also as well with Keaton Mitchell, I think getting more into the playbook here, he's a sit for me. So that's running back start sits for week 14 of the fantasy football season.